It was a bitterly cold morning on the 27th of January 1937, and high upon the bleak moorland overlooking the Lancashire town of Burnley, the peace of a small farming community would be shattered forever. At the end of the day, 4 people would lie dead, 3 victims at the hands of 1 murderer. At around 9:30 that morning, local farmer Foulds Wilkinson returned to his home, Saville Green Farm, after delivering milk to Burnley. He had left behind his daughter, 18-year-old Jane Ellen, her grandfather, 73-year-old William Pickup, and recently hired farmhand Joseph Scriven. But as Foulds drove down the long, narrow lane towards the farmhouse, nothing could prepare him for what he was about to witness. Parked up, Foulds stepped from his van and froze. There, lying motionless on the ground, was the body of an old man. And moments later he saw another, his daughter Jane, just yards away, her lifeless body sprawled near a trough. Terrified, Foulds didn't dare look further. He jumped back into his van and raced into Burnley to raise the alarm. At the very same time, there was a painter and decorator by the name of Frederick Brown, and he was making his way over the bleak moorland towards Saville Green Farm. Now Frederick, he'd been delayed by almost an hour. He should have been there around 9 o'clock that morning. But as he made his way across the frozen fields, he hopped across a stone wall. And when he made his way into the yard, that is when he would encounter the same horror Foulds Wilkinson had only just seen for himself. Jane's body lay before him. Now, thinking she had slipped over on the ice, he rushed over to help. But then he saw William Pickup lying nearby, his injuries beyond comprehension. Panicked, Frederick ran into the farmhouse, desperate to find help. But instead, he found yet another horror. Entering the kitchen and making his way into the living room, Frederick came across the lifeless body of 20-year-old John James Blackburn. He had suffered devastating gunshot wounds to the head, and beside him on the floor lay a double-barrelled shotgun. Frederick fled in terror, racing back to the village of Worsthorne to summon the police. When the police arrived, led by Detective Inspector Fenton and Superintendent Edwards, they quickly secured the area. Inside the outbuildings, they made yet another grim discovery: the body of Joseph Scriven lying dead inside the shippen. 4 bodies, 4 lifeless bodies, lying in an isolated farmhouse on the edge of the moors. By 11:30 a.m, detectives, photographers and a fingerprint expert had arrived from the county headquarters to document the scene. It was, they said, a scene of unprecedented horror. The victims to this awful tragedy were as follows. There was Joseph Scriven. He was 30 years old and a hired farmhand. He had been shot twice, once in the neck, face and shoulder, and the other into the stomach. He was found lying face up in the shipping, and it is here in this cemetery in Worcester where poor Joseph is somewhere interred. We are going to spend some time looking for his headstone, his grave. We have visited before for a podcast of the same story, and unfortunately back then we couldn't locate it. We do know his headstone is numbered A14, so hopefully this time we'll be able to narrow it down and finally locate that poor man's final resting place. There are two headstones here, simply engraved JS. We have one here, and there is another one similar just further in front, just here. However, and just like the last time we visited this small graveyard, we are unsuccessful in locating headstone A14. Many of these headstones, if not all of them, they don't contain numbers. So we are struggling again to locate Joseph Scriven's final resting place. We are going to make our way over to Trawden Methodist Cemetery next, and we're going to continue with the story as we go along. And it is there where the bodies of Jane Ellen Wilkinson and William Pickup are both interred. We're also going to make a stop off at another cemetery here in Worcester and look for the final resting place of the murderer John James Blackburn. The body of Foulds Wilkinson's daughter, Jane Ellen Wilkinson, she was 18 years old, and she was discovered lying face down very close to a trough on the outside of the farmhouse. Her face was severely disfigured from a gunshot wound. Several of her teeth from the upper and lower jaws were missing, and pretty much large parts of her skull had been blown away. She had also suffered what looked like a defensive wound to her left hand, like she had tried to stop the impact of the gunshot from hitting her face, a defensive kind of movement, which resulted in several fingers on her left hand being blown away by the shotgun itself. It was a horrific sight. So this is now 3 bodies that have been discovered by the police. A 4th body was also discovered, that of 73-year-old William Pickup, and he was the grandfather of Jane Ellen Wilkinson. And he was also discovered lying face down outside the farmhouse, once again suffering from horrific shotgun wounds. His skull also blown apart from the impact of, obviously, that shotgun itself. Absolutely horrific and frightening, to say the least. And it's here in Trawden Methodist Cemetery where the bodies of Jane Ellen Wilkinson and William Pickup are both interred. So we are going to look at all these headstones in the hope of finding those two innocent people, those innocent victims, I should say. Because to tell their tale without visiting the final resting places just wouldn't be right. Hopefully we can locate, like I said, their final resting places. We have managed to locate the final resting place of William Pickup, just one of the three victims murdered at the hands of John James Blackburn. And as you can see on the headstone, it says, in loving memory of Ellen, beloved wife of William Pickup, Saville Green Farm, Worcester, late of Heaps, who died, and then it's got years there, but our interest is just there. Also of the above, William Pickup, who died Jan 27th, 1937, aged 73 years. And then there's other names below. And as you can see, it's also the final resting place of that young girl, Jane Ellen, the daughter of Folds, and I think it says Martha Wilkinson, also died Jan 27th, 1937, aged 18 years. So this is the final resting place of both William and Jane Ellen Wilkinson, victims of that massacre at Saville Green Farm back in 1937. The body of the murderer, John James Blackburn, he was found in the living room. He was found on his back, still holding the double-barrel shotgun. He had extensive wounds to his face. He had placed the shotgun to, or very close to, the bridge of his nose, and he'd fired a single shot off. From all accounts of the descriptive reports in the newspapers, this sight was ghastly. The top of his head had been blown away. More chillingly, however, he left a note for Folds Wilkinson.
Well, Folds, I thought this would punish you more than anything else. I am not crazy, but just getting my own back. I leave you to look after my brother.
It's somewhere here in this very small graveyard of Worcester, or in Worcester, where the body of John James Blackburn is somewhere laying. But I guess when you look around, you do see a lot of empty spaces or plots where there are some missing. Now, there is a Blackburn here, but I don't believe this is the final resting place. We don't have a headstone number for this one. But if you look at the names on this one, you've got Mary Ann Blackburn, died May 19th, 1937. We know his mother is called Sarah Ann Blackburn, but she was very much alive in 1937. and when obviously this story took place. So yeah, it's not this one, but there is a Blackburn here nevertheless. But we are having a walk around and seeing if we can find and locate the final resting place of John James Blackburn. And just like that, and just like with Joseph Scriven, this tiny graveyard hasn't yielded any results in terms of locating the final resting place of John James Blackburn. It's a pity because we would like to have visited his grave. I wouldn't necessarily say pay our respects because of what he did to those innocent people. But just to tie up the loose ends and to show you guys where all these locations are would have been, well, it would have been a little bit more interesting, I guess. But like I said, time hasn't been good, and there is a lot of spaces in this graveyard where there are obviously bodies interred, but the headstones are no longer visible, they're no longer there. At the inquest 2 days later, the coroner described the event as a veritable Holocaust. Foulds Wilkinson identified the victims and explained that he had hired Blackburn only 7 weeks before the shootings, but dismissed him 3 weeks earlier for being late and disrespectful. Foulds also told at the inquest how Blackburn was always late and impudent. In the days following his sacking from Saville Green Farm, Blackburn had become moody, somewhat distraught with life and the way he was being treated. He became somewhat resentful towards Foulds Wilkinson, and many believed that he had this hatred for Foulds Wilkinson in that he'd embarrassed him by giving his job to a neighbour by the name of Joseph Scriven, just one of the 3 people murdered at the hands of John James Blackburn. Sarah Ann Blackburn told the inquest that her son, John James Blackburn, was her eldest, and he had been unemployed for around 3 weeks. And during one encounter with his mother, he said he was fed up and he seemed to sulk, and as we said, he became miserable. He did not give any answer as to why he had left the farm, but he insisted that he was not going nowhere near that shop anymore, meaning the Wilkinson farm. It was also during the inquest and when the letter that John James Blackburn had left behind on the window, when that was brought up and read out aloud, Sarah Ann, she said she couldn't explain why her younger son, Harry, would be brought into all of this. And she couldn't explain why John James Blackburn had written what he had. Many other witnesses came forward during the inquest, and one in particular by the name of Wilfred Barker. He told of how he had encountered John James Blackburn on the morning of the shootings, and he was heading in the direction of Saville Green from Church Square, which is in the centre of Wusthorne. He noticed that John James had been carrying a sack under his right arm, and when asked by those at the inquest if the sack that John James was carrying may have been obviously the weapon used, the shotgun used, Wilfred himself said he could not be sure, he could not be certain that it was indeed the shotgun. The police, they believed that Blackburn had arrived early that morning carrying the weapon in a sack. He likely shot Scriven first inside the shippen. The gunfire drew William and Jane into the yard, both killed moments later. Then Blackburn calmly placed the note on the window ledge, weighed it down with a matchbox and took his own life with the same gun. Cold, calculated, deliberate. At the inquest, and in summing up, the coroner said that John James Blackburn was indeed one cool customer, and that he had placed the matchbox on top of the note that he had handwritten purposefully, knowing that by doing so it would be found and it wouldn't simply be discarded, it wouldn't have fallen onto the floor and picked up and maybe thrown into a bin. He had placed it meticulously, knowing that it would be found close by to his body. The jury returned a verdict of willful murder for the victims and felo de se for Blackburn, death by his own hand. On Saturday, the 30th of January 1937, the village of Woosthorne fell silent. Blinds were drawn, shops closed their doors. 4 funerals were held that day. Jane Ellen Wilkinson and her grandfather William Pickup were laid to rest together in Trawden Cemetery beside Jane's late mother. Josie Scriven was buried at St John's Churchyard, Woosthorne. And just half an hour later, John James Blackburn was buried in the chapel grounds of the same village. 4 graves, 4 tragedies tied forever to one bitter January morning. Rumours soon spread across Woosthorne. Some whispered that jealousy had played a part, that Blackburn had developed feelings for Jane, and that his replacement, Josie Scriven, had become the focus of his rage. But those closest to the Wilkinson family denied it. Jane had shown no interest in either man, and it seemed far more likely that Blackburn's anger stemmed from humiliation, from losing his job and being replaced. And in the lonely weeks that followed, something inside him must have broken. Foulds Wilkinson would later remarry in 1939 and live out his days in Woosthorne until his death in 1978. But the horrors of that morning never left him, nor the community. No one will ever truly know what snapped inside John James Blackburn, what darkness overtook him. Was it jealousy, rejection, or humiliation? Or the unravelling of a mind left to fester in silence?